Today we're talking to our resident coach, Mr. Rob Hetem, about the tourism distribution process. Many people out there don't understand how the tourism value chain works. They also don't understand how the buying process works. So in this video, we're going to talk about the tourism distribution process so that you get to understand if the packaging of a product comes into being, where does it start? Hello Mzansi, my name is Xolani Mthethwa. Let's talk tourism. Talk Tourism is your channel where we talk anything and everything that is tourism in South Africa. Let's dive in. Now, Mr. Hetem, thanks very much for your time and for allowing us to have this interview with you. How are you?
I'm awesome today. Thanks, Xolani. It's always wonderful to be back with you on your show. And hello to all your viewers and listeners out there in Mzansi. I hope that you get great benefit out of today's session.
Thank you very much. Now, without a waste of time, can you just tell us how does this tourism distribution process work? Maybe starting from right from on top in terms of the introduction to say what is it and how does it work, and then we will go down to the next stage.
The distribution channel definition is that it's a system on operating structure and a linkage between various combinations of organizations and individual organizations through which a producer of travel products or services describes, sells, confirms, and distributes travel arrangements to the consumer. That's a basic overview of it. Within there, you have a whole bunch of subdivisions, which include right at the top, the consumer, and then right at the bottom, your primary producer, your products, your people that are putting together the services on the ground and are literally building those products into something that can be enjoyed and used by a customer.
That's great. Can you just break it down in terms of before a product gets into a consumer in form of a brochure or a website? Can you break it down in terms of the different levels that it goes through, getting down into the user at the top of the list?
So I think there's a couple of terms in the industry that we maybe need to look at. One of them, and I think that's the holy grail of places to start, and it's a thing called rack rate. Rack rate is the price that anybody off the street would pay to buy a product off the rack or the shelf at a supermarket, for example. So that's really what we look at as a public price. Then you have, as you'd mentioned, a whole lot of intermediaries, and I think intermediaries is really a great way to describe them. Although they operate on multiple different levels, they are all between the primary producer and the consumer, and sometimes there may be 2 or 3 levels within that. And that's where it starts to get a little bit challenging sometimes as to how many levels there are in the structure. And without overpricing it, we start off at rack rate, we start to work down from there back to what the original provider of the service can manufacture or supply that for. If you look at the suppliers, and let's start at the supply side, we're looking at transportation, accommodation, food and beverage, activities, adventure. If you look at your potential distribution channels that those organizations could use, you've got the direct channels like the internet, telephones, and social media platforms, bookings. Any of those kind of platforms could allow you to, as a producer and a supplier, to interact directly with your customer, which means that you potentially have a much better opportunity to make a better margin, assuming that you stick to the concept of a rack rate. The next sort of channel would be an indirect channel, which includes retail travel agents, tour wholesalers, and tour operators. And within those tour operators and distribution systems, you also have online distribution systems. Fundamentally, they are the same as retail travel agents or tour operators in that they do the same kind of function, except that they use an online platform to distribute it. So they'll be online. The booking.coms, the Agodas, and those kind of platforms are online travel agents that would distribute product. If you come back to a retail travel agent, somebody like Flight Centre is a perfect example, and that's a global business as well.
Yeah.
Flight Centre would probably be looking at an average of a 10% commission. So off the 150 Rand rack that you charge your client, they would want to see that they could achieve at least a 10% commission. So that means that your earnings have now been reduced from 100 or from 50 Rand. Your margin has now been brought down to 35 Rand because you need to give them 10% commission, which is 15 Rand. And that's why you need to look very, very carefully at your initial distribution between your client price or rack rate and your distributor's rate. A tour wholesaler who would be putting together, and an inbound operator would be putting together a whole bunch of products together. They generally would also be selling to international travel agents. Now, you can start to see why it gets a little bit complicated. They put all of that together, they stitch the pieces together, and now they want to make their commission too. So they would probably, and a sort of rough rule of thumb would be 20 to 25% commission to that level. They're going to take the 20% and they're going to give 10% to the travel agent. So you don't have to pay double, but they're paying it for you. From there, you'd be then looking at your customers, which can be your FITs, your leisure groups, your corporates, your MICE, and each one of them has a different requirement. So I think that's a fairly broad overview of how that structure works. I hope that's explained it sufficiently, Kolani.
I think it breaks it down very nicely, because now you are able now to understand the issue of pricing, because there's I don't know whether it's a perception or it's a reality, particularly in the domestic market in South Africa, that to travel in the domestic space in South Africa is expensive. What affects the pricing that the consumer then pays at the end?
I think one of the challenges that we've faced as a destination is that we've been really, really focused on international inbound tourism, where your distribution channel and your distribution methodology tends to make distribution more expensive. I have always liked the idea of SADC rates, or South African resident rates, and a lot of countries use that. And then it's about a numbers game. Then it's about, can we create a decent harmony and balance between international tourists, which as we see now have dried up completely, and domestic tourism. And I think if we can start with the development of domestic tourism in a more inclusive and aggressive way, and encourage South Africans to travel, we can start dispelling the myth that it's overly expensive. Hotels generally in South Africa, I suppose if they're in the cities, the distribution costs can be contained because they can use the benefits of being in a hub of a city, and distribution food costs and access and all of those kind of things. When you start talking about the lodges, and I think this is sometimes where we do tend to see the really, really high price tags, a lot of the lodges are off the grid, are self-sustaining. They need to have a lot of infrastructure costs put in there. Accessibility and all of those kind of aspects start to play a part in increasing costs. So I think we've got to differentiate between the actual cost of product and what is an equitable price to be able to offer it to the domestic market. But I think a South African rate would go a long way, or a locals rate would go a long way to dealing with the problem of overpricing due to international distribution trends.
Rob, before I let you go, there is one aspect that I think also contributes to what we are talking about here today, which is a big problem in South Africa, the issue of transport. Because before you travel to Western Cape with a family of 4 already, you must have at least 20 grand. Before you even get into talking about where you're going to stay and what activities are you going to do when you get there, already, if it's 2 adults and 2 kids, you're looking at 20 grand just for the return flights.
One of the things, and having done a lot of international marketing myself, the first thing we always got hit with before even security was the cost of transportation. And so I've taken a look at it as well. if I look at other countries, if we compare it rand for rand, dollar for dollar, we are generally, I would say, more expensive. I do, though, looking at the positive side of what you said and acknowledging that travel is potentially more expensive, we have some of the most wonderful opportunities to turn the travel into a part of the journey. And instead of people viewing the destination as a gap between where they depart from and where they arrive at, we have some really, really spectacular places in between Gauteng and the Western Cape, or Gauteng and the Eastern Cape, or Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga. One of the best suggestions I can make, and something that we are well aware of as a community of South Africans, is using the services of transport providers, getting a group of people to travel together in a group, even if it's an ad hoc home group, and traveling along the roadway to turn that into a part of the journey. You can minimize the transport costs, create a travel bubble for yourself in terms of COVID, and go and see some of the sites, visit some of it's homestays, bed and breakfasts that are available, activities. There's great food options. You yourself know how many options we have. So I think that there's an opportunity in there. And the more that we travel as a community, the more we travel as South Africans, the more we're going to open the minds of others in our communities to the opportunity to travel.
Wow, thanks very much, Rob. I think you've covered a mouthful, and I know that this subject, we just touching, on bits and pieces. It's quite a very broad subject that we can discuss for a very long time. But I think for the purpose of today, what we have said, I think will benefit our viewers. And in our next video, we will then get you in to talk about packaging. Now we look at specifics of packaging because it's related to what we just discussed. Mzansi, you've heard it all. And if you have not subscribed to Talk Tourism Mzansi, please do so. Press that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen and hit that little bell so that you get notifications once a new video is uploaded. Send us your comments about what the video has tried to explain to you today, and tell us, what do you feel about traveling, particularly in the domestic space, the issue of the distribution process as it's been explained. Tell us what are your views, and tell us about other videos that would like us to bring to you around the same subject. Like I've said, in our next video with the resident coach, we will then bring you the packaging. We love you, Mzansi. Stay tuned and keep safe. Thank you.